Hey George, how are you?
Well, great. Good to see you, Ram.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for making time. And maybe let's start with a quick introduction about yourself, and then we can start.
Sure. So I am a physician, an ophthalmologist, and I have worked in industry for the past 15 or so years in different roles. I've worked as an equity analyst in New York. I've also worked in drug development and as a service provider. And at my last job, we were a company called Lexitas. It was a small company that ran ophthalmic clinical trials. And any one time we were running 40, 50 studies. And I left there a year and a half ago and joined what is now Opus Genetics, which is a company that's dedicated to developing gene therapies for blinding conditions of childhood, right? So childhood blindness. So we have two assets in the clinic. One is for a condition called LC5. The other one is just now about to start with clinical studies, which is best one. And so we're super excited to have a portfolio of gene therapies that come from the University of Pennsylvania.
Um, Thank you. And what I find fascinating about your journey is the multiple roles and hats you won throughout your career. I feel uh, very related to that kind of a goal because I've also come from a very similar sort of multi-role perspective into the clinical
Yep.
trial industry. Um, as you know, I've been a tech entrepreneur for
Yep.
first half of my career. Um, coming from a computer science background and trying to break into healthcare about 9 years ago is challenging. It's not the easiest market or the space to get into. I think like
Mhm.
yourself, it requires a certain amount of expertise and training, which if you're coming from a pure compute background, it's not quite clear. But fortunately, what I've found is a opportunity to work with a few physician scientists like yourself as co-founders. I built a
Mhm.
company, Lexant Bio, and what we've done at Lexant is develop a few molecular diagnostic assays in oncology. So the process of building a company like that, going from a small biotech company with an idea, fundraising, working through the product development cycle, your protocol development, your study development, recruiting, working with many parts of the ecosystem like your CRO sites, various other vendors. So we did I would say, a full spectrum of all that work, and I've certainly gotten to learn quite a bit about this process in the journey. And ultimately, we had an outcome where we were able to exit the business to Roche end of 2019. And I began my journey in terms of thinking about what do I do next. And one of the things which I was pretty fascinated about and quite sure about also at that time was the potential for AI to be, uh, a much bigger part of our thinking than it has been, I would say, in 2021 or 2020. So, and I also was looking around opportunities and I said, well, what is the area where there's the maximum impact? Because there's impact from automation and bringing in AI into this mix. And I think clinical trials, as you would agree from your past as a CRO leader, is entirely a human and human intelligence driven market. And I think there's plenty of opportunity for us to really expand the bandwidth which this market brings. I think we should be able to do more with less, but at the same time, significantly improve the quality, reliability, and consistency. So yeah, so that's kind of where we are and what we're doing right now. Tilda.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's so complimentary to what we're doing. My first experience with AI in clinical trials was really around imaging, right? We were using computers to identify patterns in images that might predict which patients would be the best responders to certain new medications. And that's super cool stuff, right? It's a very practical outcome. But what you guys are doing is incredible from an efficiency standpoint and from a quality standpoint, because so much of clinical trials is is sort of the repetitive type work, right? Or work that can absolutely be handled by the computer. And so I know that our current trial working with you guys, that's exactly what we're doing and has led to faster startup, lower queries. About every metric has been improved by using your system. And so I'm absolutely very grateful for your journey and getting into what you did because it's made a direct and immediate impact on our LC5 trial.
No, it's really great to work with you and your partners or the sites you bring in. And yeah, we're very excited. I feel what we're doing right now is really just the first innings or second innings. There's
Mhm.
so much more to build on. And as we see, right, intelligence is starting to really develop into a place where I think we can certainly see where this trend is going over the next few years. So let me ask you something, George. Tell me more about your particular trial, maybe the opportunity, that the design, how you're approaching it.
Yeah. So this is super interesting. This is really the core of the value proposition of AI or computer learning in our program, which is that we have a lot of programs. We have 7 of them in our pipeline, but the trials are all very similar. It's just looking at different genes. So, in the world of inherited childhood blindness, you know, there's about 280 different genes that can cause this. And what we're doing at Opus is we're targeting them one by one in a highly efficient conveyor belt sort of string of pearls type approach. And so for us, it's all about it. Yeah, it's almost like manufacturing, right? It's all about consistency and efficiency with these things. And so LCA5 is just the first. And you can see our pipeline has 7. And so what I'm really hopeful for is that we can have significant cost savings, significant time savings by implementing with your system on the first trial and then just having the computer help us replicate it each time we do the same thing with a different gene. And so that's the real core value proposition of why we're particularly interested in this. And to get to your question about exactly for the LCA5 trial, really the interesting thing about this one with AI was that there are a lot of different assessments in this one. There's a lot of potential variables, potential different data points that we need to capture. And the AI system was able to come in and absolutely give us a great first step on that. So in the LCA5 trial and specifically, we're using AI and we're using particularly your platform for a number of reasons. And the first reason really is around the amount of data sets that we have, like the different data that we need to capture from all the endpoints and the ability of the computer to really be able to target in on that in a way that I haven't really seen clinical trial databases ever do in the past, at least with the ease and the efficiency that you guys were able to do startup and able to do to execute. And so that was really huge. The integration with the site is really great too. I've used that, as you know, on a different project in the past before Opus, where we utilized that on a study that was more high volume, high throughput, and the ability to integrate into the system, identify patients, give workflows to different roles within the practice made all the difference in the world. And as you know from that practice and in that particular phase 3 study, I think they enrolled 100 patients in that trial. So it was a very high throughput um, uh, effort with your technology. It would have been extremely difficult. We would have needed multiple additional personnel to execute in a traditional fashion in that trial.
Yeah, and that's really the crux of it, right? I think when I look at the burden and the way we currently design trials as an industry, um, it's sort of lost in translation, where I think we all design for what's best from our lens, but there's so
Mhm.
many stakeholders in this whole ecosystem that it's very hard to sort of optimize, or and I think it's very easy probably to sub-optimize for yourself. And I really
Yeah.
think that's what's happening across the board. And sites have massive burden on the execution side of these trials. Similarly, CROs or sponsors also have equally high amount of burden, right? Because your sites are your bedrock, and if sites are burdened, that burden does translate back into what I call upstream. So it could be monitoring, which is burdened because of the site's lack of, streamlined workflows. So I think one of the things I want to touch upon is because you've seen us and we've worked together both on a site side of things as well as the sponsor side of things, where with Opus. On the site side, I think I'd like to understand, as a sponsor, what are some of the challenges you've seen in the past, and also as a CRO, because you
Yeah.
run Lexitas,
Yeah.
and I'm sure you have a lot of perspective on running many trials and working with
Yeah.
hundreds of sites. So, what are some challenges you've seen?
What you said first was incredibly insightful, right? So when we develop for a trial, we develop one system, but yet there's so many different stakeholders that have such different needs, and the ability to tailor to each of those makes everybody's workflow more efficient. And I think that's exactly the answer to your question, is that what I've seen from being on the sponsor side, from the CRO side, um, and from the site side, and from running trials on your platform, the ability to customize for different workflows is huge, because as a sponsor, what do I care about? I care about enrollment rates. I care about queries. I care about getting the data and ensuring the quality of the data, things like that, right? Audit preparedness, all the quality metrics. From a site side, when I'm trying to enroll patients, as a PI, I care about, okay, am I making sure that I'm doing all the right things in the right order, exactly like I should? From a coordinator standpoint, she's trying to get in touch with the patients, figure out which patients on the schedule are the right patients to roll the trial. When do we do follow up? All the logistics of that. How do we have the most recent consent forms? Are we doing everything like we're supposed to? It's incredibly executional. And then from a CRO side, you're basically in the middle trying to manage both of those. So it really is an interesting concept to have one system that you program that then will pull out and create amongst itself different workflows for different users, different roles. So that's a very, very cool thing.
Yeah. And, stepping back, right? I think when I was in my sponsor role at my previous firm, Lexon,
Mhm.
what was fascinating is you ultimately were, beholden to the performance of your site or sites, I would say.
100%.
And
Yeah.
everything we were doing, like, for example, unlike my experience prior to Lexon, which was mostly tech entrepreneurship, you have certain metrics which are usually defined by product launch, some amount of early revenue, some
Mhm.
ARR, some few logos of customers. And that's really how you go about and, raise your capital and sort of continue toward the journey of building the company. And my experience building Lexant has shown me that you really are beholden to your investors' interest in the type of data you're able to present, and also the winds of the market. Are you
Mhm.
in a space where
Yeah.
there's funding available or not? We went through these cycles where there were periods when you could raise, and there were other
Yep.
where whatever you're working on is not where the market is in terms of being able to fund you, right? And the other thing on the site side is, obviously after starting Tilda, I took this approach of not trying to build a platform or any type of technology without fully understanding the whole picture, both sponsors, sites, as well as CRO. I have worked in a sponsor and a CRO relationship prior to building Tilda. But I would say the first half of our journey, or the first third of our journey with Tilda, about a year and a half, has been really working at the site level. We purchased a site. We went in and we really got to understand the challenges of running a site, the what it's like to be a coordinator, what it's like to be a owner of a site, and really like getting into the nitty gritty details of how do you manage 20 studies in parallel at a site, all the issues you face, right? And in this process, I also got a chance to really get into the details of coordinating and working with the site staff, working with patients, talking to many sponsors, CROs who would come to our site and talk about putting a study. And what's fascinating is so much of this is essentially up to the coordinator. Coordinator is the most underappreciated role in the entire clinical trial picture. I understand, you know, somehow that was just not part of the calculus when I was at Lexan. This was not a
Yeah.
discussion we've had at our board meetings or our regular things within our team, where we said, we have 23 sites or something, and how do we make sure all of our coordinators are happy? They're actually
Hmm.
motivated, they feel empowered, they're going to do the work so that we can get the data.
Hmm.
And, I think having taken this other side of it, being a coordinator for about a year and a half at Tilda, I really started to appreciate a lot about the challenges, right? I would say we had multiple roles in a single job, I would say. You had came from managing feasibility, budget
Hmm.
negotiations, contracts, then ultimately doing your trainings, startup at the site, recruiting patients, calling all the patients, working through the backlog, bringing them in for screening, performing the screening, collecting the data, putting it into the EDC, doing all the quality and query management. Of course, there's regulatory, like you mentioned, the IRB communication and interaction, and then finance. Ultimately getting
Hmm.
paid for all the work you're doing, right? And
Hmm.
I will say, going back and looking at our own processes and trying to do this with no AI or automation or what we call AI teammates, it's a place where, to me, that was just unfathomable, at least where we are today, because you can bring so much efficiency when you sort of adopt AI into some of these day-to-day workflows and you really collaborate with an AI, and some of these workflows are starting to become very, very intelligent just from where the field is going.
Yep.
So, yeah, no, I completely
Think,
get where you
y-
come.
yeah, the interesting thing is that you're exactly right. The site coordinators and the staff at the site are the ones who make the studies go. And they're the ones who produce the data that a lot of times your study falls upon, right? I've seen that over and over in studies, whether it's imaging data or ancillary things like that, that the technicians are doing and that the doctor's reviewing. And 100%, like at, at sites I've been around and at the site I used to work at, it, you'd have a number of protocols on your desk, and the coordinators were the ones who decided which one was at the top. And it was decided based on, you know, their ability to execute it and how comfortable they felt with it. And so it really is very critical to execution. Like it goes down to the site coordinator. It probably is the most critical position in a study. Right there with the PI,
Yeah,
couldn't
and
agree more.
and,
It's
and speaking of your own site experience as a PI and
Mhm.
working on that phase 3 study, which we worked on
Mhm.
with your team, I think you had one coordinator managing about 100 patients at that point. You
Yeah.
were the top enroller in that study, right? But to me,
Yeah.
that's really the power, right? How do we build that kind of bandwidth into this model where you
Yep.
can enable sites to perform so much work at a very high quality and ultimately be able to really push the frontier of innovation? The current model
Yeah.
has really like burned down in many ways. I don't see how we
Oh,
can sustain this going forward unless we do
yeah.
something different.
Yeah. I haven't even thought about that, but you're exactly right. We enrolled 100 patients across 4 surgeons with one coordinator who did all the work through your system. And and it was the top enroller for that site for that study. And it's by far like normally you would staff something like that with probably 3 or 4 people. So it really did increase the efficiency of our site coordinator by 3 or 4x. And that individual executed well, really enjoyed the trial actually, even despite that volume, wasn't burned out, wasn't flustered. She enjoyed the trial. I mean, she'd have done another 100 if the trial had allowed it. So it really is powerful. It's very cool. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I remember the experience of working through that process and
Yeah.
having these reactions like, wow, like, I collected all my source data. And from there on, anything related to working with external systems, working with
Hmm.
RB, your monitoring, querying, a lot of that was happening pretty much through the AI teammate that you were able to provide. And I think that's the power, right? And I don't see a world where we all wouldn't have our own AI-enabled teammates. I mean, for what you do, what I do, and what
Mhm.
certainly a site and a CRO and a sponsor would do. And I think that's really the vision where we're going with Tilda. I think the opportunity to build right now is not just the AI, but the interface through which you can work with an AI. So, what is the collaborative layer which you can build so that we can work with an AI, right? And I think traditionally, if you look at just hiring teams and working within our own teams, us as humans, we have the capability to interact. We have emotions. We have personalities. We can work on different modalities. We can share different applications on which we can bring context very quickly. These sort of things are not really there yet. When say you use ChatGPT, or the chat interface is a very limited sort of an interface for performing real work, right? Or at least work which is related to the type of work we do in the clinical space. Um, but I think our goal and what we've built is really just that, building a platform through which you can work with multiple AI-based teammates. You can collaborate with them, you can train them, you can teach them, you can monitor them. And I think I see a future where this sort of a thing becomes normal across the board, right? I think it should be the way we expand the productivity we all have. And I think ultimately, I want to touch back on something you said about the pipeline and the way you're thinking about Opus, and the opportunities of running multiple different trials, um, in a quick succession. And I think when we first talked about it, I was explaining to you the main motivation, at least for me, why we're doing this at Tilda is I really do think the current bandwidth of how many trials we can run, how many patients we can recruit, how big the the space for biotech innovation can be is really curtailed because we have not had any meaningful expansion in the amount of infrastructure in clinical trials
Mhm.
for the last 10 years. In fact, I would argue that the amount of infrastructure shrunk because we've lost quite a few physicians who would normally have done research. And there's data out there which shows that it's been going down, or at least we have lost some during the COVID period and we haven't recovered back. That is a problem for the industry, right? I think when we think about how do we push the frontier, I mean, especially now it's exciting because we have really strong models on the biology side, on the protein folding side, like let's say AlphaFold and models like that. So what to me that showcases is you are expanding the number of targets you can potentially come out with at the very early stage of the development cycle. And, that's great and wonderful. But once you get into the clinical model and into your human studies, where is the bandwidth? We currently do not have that bandwidth, and we need to do something to expand this tenfold, maybe 100-fold over the next coming decade. And I think you're going at something which is very similar in rare disease. And yeah, would love to touch more on this, right?
It's this is the core of our business proposition, right? So we're developing treatments for rare diseases, right? For but diseases that affect 1,000 kids, in the United States, like small stuff, but so meaningful because these 1,000 kids are going blind. And we know the technology works, right? I mean, Luxturna was the first one approved by Spark and it worked. And so, running the clinical trials is is so important to be efficient, right? If you're in a big indication where if you're after diabetes, obesity, something like that, then the numbers make sense, in big pharma to go after those indications and run the trials with a lot of money and a lot of spend and a lot of time. But when we're going after these targeted diseases, in order to make it viable and to make the company real, we have to be efficient. And that's exactly why I'm so thrilled that you guys are doing what you're doing because otherwise these kids wouldn't get treated, right? I mean, it just wouldn't be viable. The bigger picture for the country or for the world is that the ability to use AI or the ability to use computer learning in clinical trials to improve efficiency allows us to treat diseases we otherwise would not be able to treat.
George, what's stopping you from doing this without, let's say AI or any of these latest technologies, right? Like, for example, when you're in your CRO role, I'm sure you've dealt with customers like yourself,
Yes.
a pipeline of small, rare disease indications, or
Yes.
even studies which are not technically rare. Uh, but
Yes.
why are we not able to basically
I,
enable opportunity?
I've watched. I've watched a number of companies from the periphery when I was a service provider, you know, just not be able to get drugs developed because of the cost and timelines involved. It's just like any other business, right? And that's the thing is to impact these patients, you have to create a viable business or else it won't get across the finish line. So it's an interesting concept that not any other industry really has to worry about, which is that you're trying to do good for society by treating these patients, but you have to build a real business that's viable to be able to do that. And I've seen it so many times where it's great science, it really looks good, but the pathway just isn't viable from a commercial standpoint and the project dies, because it takes too long, it's too expensive, it's too hard to find the patients, that kind of stuff. And that's fundamentally what I'm trying to solve from my standpoint is how do I run these trials as lean, efficiently, with as high quality as possible, right? Using every tool we can. And a big part of that is AI and through you guys, honestly. If I'm developing these 7 projects and I'm developing them at price points or at timelines that are used by bigger indications, then they may or may not make sense. So it's all about efficiency, getting these things to patients, proving they're safe or efficacious, and then trying to get them approved.
And I think I I found something interesting in what you said, right? It's not just about, how much your overall budgeting is. It's also the timeline. And I think one other thing which I want to point out is it's also about how you can parallelize these multiple approaches at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I think you could argue that, yes, you might have the resources, but how do you parallelize 7 trials at the same time and sort of go at it at the same pace as, running like 2 or 3 trials, right? And
Yep.
do you find that as another
Oh,
sort of lever you need to think about?
100%. Like most companies my size, can concentrate on like one asset. And we are just concentrating on one right now. So, but as this thing unfolds, and if it does what we hope it does, the goal is to unlock the ability of a small team to be able to execute in parallel a number of trials, right? And that's what will drive value for our shareholders. That's what will get treatments to patients faster. That's what will move science forward for this. And so that's absolutely the goal. For a small company, the answer can't be, well, if I need to run 7 trials, I'm going to hire 7 times the number of people. That just isn't a realistic business proposition. It needs to be, how do we leverage what we have from technology to increase the efficiency of the team that we have? So that's
Yeah.
what we're trying to unlock.
And it's also not guaranteed that if you do expand your resource by 7 times, that you actually have 7 times the bandwidth, right? I mean, that you probably have some
No,
more
and
scale at that point.
yeah, and as you know, you expand like that, you start to have to add in layers for management oversight, that come with having that many more people. Absolutely. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just touching on this, on the aspect of quality, I have seen how traditional monitoring works, the traditional service industry works around this. And as you know, it's entirely driven by a person going to the site or maybe going through the systems and looking
Mhm.
at all the documentation, all the data which is coming in, and really doing like forensic level monitoring on top of this. And I'm just curious from your perspective, how do you look at the role of AI going forward, right? Because I'm sure certain parts of it cannot be done through AI, and some can be only done through an actual monitor who's on site. But how are you thinking about that going forward? In terms of the
Yeah.
data?
Well, I think one of the big advantages of using computers in this is really pattern recognition early in real time, because what we're trying to do, so quality, first of all, is the number one thing for us, right? If we're not running high quality trials, then the rest of it doesn't matter. So quality is always number one for us. And quality to us will likely always involve humans to some degree. What saves me time, what saves, on quality, what's best for patients, really, honestly, at the end of the day, is if you can recognize patterns in poor quality very quickly and be able to mitigate them very quickly. So A computer does that in real time with the data. You know, the traditional way to do it with monitors is very hard to do it in real time. And one of the first applications that I used AI for, that was for a different company that was more image based, was looking at the quality of images in real time. Like, the patient is sitting with the coordinator in front of an imaging machine. The image gets taken, and before that patient even gets up out of the seat, the quality is reported back to the coordinator. So if a retake needs to happen, it happens at the point of care, right? So it's not a human looking at it that afternoon and then they have to call the patient, come back and retake the images or anything like that. It's happening in real time. And doing that throughout the data set is critical, because the worst possible thing you can have happen, maybe not the worst possible thing, but one of the bad things that can happen is if you get systemic patterns of poor quality in a data set that isn't corrected quickly. And so that's a huge, huge thing.
Yeah. And what you're pointing out is actually very interesting, because we see this often with sites we work with as well, because the monitor is doing quality management on behalf of the sponsor, but I think
Hmm.
AI would also need to do the same on their behalf for themselves, because
Hmm.
you are ultimately responsible from the quality of work you're performing from an AI perspective. And we have an inspection readiness product where, we have a AI teammate, which is a quality teammate, and is essentially checking all the work being performed at the site, and essentially in real time reporting where you are with your inspection readiness. And if there's any areas which be buffered up, or there are areas where we need to go back and, like you said, maybe an informed consent was not the right version, and you have to reconsent that patient, or it could be a missed report somewhere which is not part of your binder, not part of your data set.
Hmm.
And so what I've found fascinating is uh, even in the most incredibly efficient sites and places where they have a really tight quality program, you still cannot get to the accuracies which we're getting through the current AI based implementations. And I think it's just not on the quality side. I've found that even on finance side, for example, one of the articles I read recently said something like 95% of the sites do not bill for all the work they've performed. And it's reasonable, right? Because
Yeah.
in an industry like healthcare, I think we've evolved very strong systems over the last few decades to be able to solve for that exact same problem, which is billing. And you have this EMR, infrastructure, which I think some would argue, physicians like yourself might argue, the EMRs are actually more billing systems rather than healthcare, patient record systems. And
Hmm.
we don't have anything like that in clinical research. The stakes are high, and it's very easy to miss, a certain set of invoiceables or a certain set of, visits you performed, unscheduled visits, certain drugs you might have used, which pass through to the sponsor. So it's just, everywhere we look in clinical research, I find the burden to be on somebody to make sure everything's going well. And it's I don't think it's a sustainable model. And hence we see this whole concept of burden, right? Whether it be sponsors, CRO side, or site side. And then just sort of slows the whole process down for all of us who are ultimately trying to get more shots on the goal.
Your point on the finances is so poignant. It's so true. The the clinical side of things, like the clinical care, um, the EMRs do such a great job of capturing, I mean, that's one of the biggest advantages, honestly, is that they capture the billing and they capture how you're supposed to appropriately bill for the work that has been done. And on the clinical trial side, that's completely ignored by the software to the extent of my knowledge. And that burden is put on people. And I think that is something that's probably a very low hanging fruit for sites to be much more efficient. Yeah.
And talking about the imaging based AI you've used in the past from a
Yeah.
quality perspective, right?
Yeah.
Um, I find it fascinating because today the problem, at least from looking at it both from a biotech perspective, as a biotech founder, and now from a site perspective, the place where you can give me a technology like that as a coordinator, and for me to actually use it, just does not exist right now. None of the
Mhm.
systems I have used, or I can, CRO would possibly give me, or a sponsor would give me, has that capability where, you can bring these external integrations very quickly and enable you to do things which would otherwise be done manually. And I
Hmm.
feel like everybody benefits from this, right? What's
Hmm.
missing here? Have you looked at ways to bring, you know, transformative technologies not into the clinic or into the
Yeah.
policy?
It's a wide open field, right? I mean, we did it with a very homegrown solution. And to be quite honest with you, I spent most of my time on an imaging problem that's slightly different. You're talking about a very practical problem that needs to be solved. The problem that I've spent most of my time on, though, is is in an era of personalized medicine. That's the exact tag that this goes under. How do you make sure that the treatment you're giving has the highest likelihood of affecting the patient positively? And so, can we use the computer to assist the physicians, assist the investigators, assist the sponsors in selecting the patients whose biology is most amenable to whatever treatment you're evaluating? We actually just got some of our work on that in diabetic eye disease accepted by the American Journal of Ophthalmology. So we're publishing on that very shortly. But every patient is different and everybody's biology is a little bit different. And we have treatments that work for some people, but don't work for others. And you really want to just not treat patients who are not going to respond and make sure that patients who will respond have access to whatever the treatment is. That's the goal. And I think that using imaging and using computer vision and computer learning for that is honestly, it's one of my passions, right? It's something I think will be so good for so many people if we can actually figure that out.
Yeah. And I think to your point, right, there are amazing technologies out there. There's
Mhm.
people working on these problems which are clearly published and they have great, I would say, benchmarking looks good. But pulling that into a trial pretty easily and building a platform which will allow sponsors to do that, or even developers
Yes.
to put it onto a platform so that you can be part of a trial. I think that marketplace style platform
Yeah.
where you can very easily like design your trial,
Yes.
pull in the right components, the right teams, collaborate with them.
Yeah.
All that
It,
seems to be missing in this
it's
industry.
it's like the app store, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
like
Yeah.
like you go in the app store and you're like, we want to use this, and this. Yeah, that doesn't exist. And it's hard. And like when I was on the CRO side, it was almost like you hit on something that's so real. There's so many different technologies out there, but actually implementing them in a clinical study gets extremely complex very fast for a myriad of reasons. And so having a platform where you can actually have like, and you'll know this better than me, but like an API or some sort of plugin, my very crude way of calling it an app store is sort of how I envision it. But
Yeah.
that would be so meaningful for clinical trials. Yeah, we do it in rare disease. We see it because we're using really specialized equipment that's targeted towards that particular pathology. And it may not be widely used because it's only applicable to a certain number of patients. And so having easy interoperability is an unsolved problem right now.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think a couple of things which come to my mind when you're saying that is I think ultimately you can do all of this if you had enough resources. I mean,
Mhm.
that's well understood. But being able to go from a protocol to a first patient, first visit
Yeah.
in a matter of hopefully a week or two, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
In a very
Yeah.
short time frame where you use majority of your resourcing to really like check and validate and make sure whatever your platform or AI has sort of set together and
Yep.
then being able to run multiple studies in parallel with
Yep.
architecture, right? And then you have a series of workforce, which I call AI teammates, constantly checking, making sure everything's going well, making sure your quality is on right place, making your startup is on right place, and then collaborating. I think all of these seem to be the type of things which we should shoot for, and that's what
Mhm.
we're going for. And ultimately, the way I look at it is companies like yourself will be able to deliver and effectively compete, in a world where you're saying like, I've got 7 assets and I want to take it to the trials. And I want to deliver value to my shareholders. And
Mhm.
uh, yeah, I mean, you can go 2 at a time or you can go 7 at a time, but hopefully
Hmm.
the amount of resources are, or
Yeah.
even the resources I actually feel, at least on the capital side, I feel like people or companies which differentiate with their strategy and can effectively show that they're not distracted when they run these many programs probably can raise a lot more capital anyway, right?
Mm.
There's not enough capital. It's just that it's on a risk adjusted basis, doesn't work out. Uh, if you're distracted, but if you can unlock that productivity and you can show that you as a platform or a team can manage multiple assets, and hence
Yep.
you need to raise more. I feel like that shift might happen very quickly. I would think, just in the biotech.
It, I think it could, right? I mean, you prove that, and then the capital allocation will be there, right? And and it just goes to show you that the power of this is so far has not been unlocked, right? Because people haven't, you know, been able to really execute against it. So the new technologies and the stuff that's being built, you know, I mean, how amazing would it be if every biotech out there could do more assets or do more science than they're currently doing? I mean, you would see such an amazing impact on our society if that happened on large scale. Yeah.
I believe that those days are not too far away, George.
Yeah.
Even if you look at, some of the offshoots of AlphaFold, Google's products, right? I mean, that's what they're saying. They're saying we will have a drug for every target almost, right? And that's great. I think in a science perspective, maybe we can simulate certain parts of biology and figure out the right protein or the right antibody design. Um, but bringing it into the clinic, bringing it into the research pipeline, and then ultimately seeing that kind of maybe 1,000, 10,000 fold expansion bandwidth. Uh, I'm looking forward to that day
Right.
because I think
Yeah.
we would need, many four more people working in our industry when that happens.
Yeah.
And, and we certainly will need equally number of AI teammates working alongside us, right? So I really do think it's an age of abundance,
Mhm.
which can get unlocked.
Right now, the bottleneck is in clinical development, right? You've got AlphaFold and many others that are identifying novel targets and identifying how to drug targets we don't run druggable. But right now, we haven't seen the same sort of efficiency gains on clinical development to match that. And that's, I think that's exactly what you guys are trying to unlock. I mean, it's super cool and it could be very impactful.
Yeah, no, I would say I've certainly seen different approaches to solving this particular problem, right?
Hmm.
Clinical development certainly is a bandwidth constraint
Hmm.
space. And I think you could argue maybe we don't need the number of patients we try to recruit. Maybe there are better
Hmm.
ways to design a study or, use synthetic
Yep.
data, synthetic patients, control arms. I'm sure you've seen all these sort of ways to reduce the amount of work we would need to do on the clinical development side. But where we are focused and where I'm passionate about is even if you were to do that, I still think there's 100 times, 1,000 times more increment in the amount of work we would need to do in clinic, as in like with patients and with clinics and with physicians. And that simply is just not possible right now. Everything right
Yep.
now seems at the brim of whatever capacity we have. And hence, we need some new opportunities to really improve the bandwidth. And if you kind of look at our way of bringing AI into this field, we think about it from a perspective of how can I improve um, the bandwidth of a certain persona. So if it's a site, it's a coordinator, a quality person, it's a regulatory person, it's a finance person. If it's a sponsor or a CRO, we have different personas. They generally have data managers, project
Hmm.
managers, site activation. And so we've gone through that process of identifying personas which are operationally very burdensome and bringing them in and training certain aspects of their workflow through an AI teammate and essentially saying, this is how you expand the bandwidth. Now you can do 10 times more work, right? Um, and I'm very positive. I think like in general, this trend will continue to develop because the world's mission today seems to be the pursuit of AI singularity. I think all the resourcing, all the smartest people seem to be working on some sort of AI to deliver a very superior intelligence. So, it's going to happen. And I think we all need to be prepared to take advantage of this new model, right? And go from there.
100%. Yeah. And we've loved working with you guys.
Yeah.
I think we've got an amazing, it's just an amazing fit with our pipeline and our model, right? Where we're developing an ultra rare disease to unlock efficiency with you guys without sacrificing any quality. And so it, it's fine. Be at the tip of the spear. Yeah.
I'd love to see 70
Yeah.
assets in your pipeline, George.
Yeah. Me too one day. Yeah.
Yeah.
One
And I
day.
think you told me
Yeah.
that there were, what was it, like 200 plus targets, which are, the opportunity
This,
is large, right? From a rare disease perspective.
there's enough of these genes that need to be developed to keep us busy for quite a while.
Yeah. It's so
Yeah.
motivating. There's some
Yeah.
fascinating amount of opportunities which get unlocked, and the
Yeah.
benefits and the impact is.
If there's ever any question about how important it is to be doing this kind of stuff, I would encourage you to watch the KOL event, the physician event that our company did in December, where they described in detail the life-changing effects in the first 3 patients we treated in the LC5 program. It's traumatic and it's motivating. So it's, we got 280 to go.
I have a fun anecdote there. When I first heard about your company, I heard through our CRO partner who's working with,
Yeah.
and I Googled it, and then I found this New York Times article, and I think the headline, or at least the abstract, said something like, uh, somebody who had no vision all their life was able to
Yeah.
see for the very first time.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking, this is like sci-fi stuff, right? This is unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I read through the article, and I was just completely blown away. I was just that, how is
Yeah.
this possible? How can somebody who's been blind all their life, and
Yeah.
then start thinking about what are the implications then, right? I mean, what
Yeah.
happens when for the very first time in your life, actually see, and how
Yeah.
do you process all that? It must be
For
bipolar.
the first patient in our trial, was treated a year and a half ago now, and he was 39 years old when he was treated. He had been blind since he was 1, and he got formed vision for the first time in his life. He learned what a ceiling fan looked like, what a skateboard looked like. I mean, it was cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just
Yeah.
hearing it is like such an emotional
Yeah.
thing, right? So
Yeah.
that's great. I love the work you're doing, and we're so happy to be part of journey you guys are on.
Yeah.
No, this is frankly why we're doing it. This
Yeah.
is motivating. Gotta pushing and work on this.